Hello, welcome to Torque Transferred, where we take and discover uncommon perspectives to outrageous challenges. My name is Joy Schanneberger. I'm the founder and CEO of Boone and your host for today. It's my pleasure to have Mr. Frank Kelley, the Vice President of Defense Acquisition University, here with us today. Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
I am glad to be here. And what I want to say is one thing that folks might not know is that you supported us a great deal with your TEDx talk, which is still one of our more popular ones. And so I owe you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. You that TEDx talk and your coaching inspired the flag behind me, which one of my colleagues got for me. So that was a lot of fun. Frank, thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. You've obviously had a few outrageous challenges in your life, both on the professional side and the personal side. I want to start with the personal first, right? I think it's really easy in the national security sector to go straight to business. And I want to spend some time talking about Frank as the husband and the dad, right? So your outrageous challenge was going from essentially a family of 3 to 7 and eventually 8 total overnight. Talk to me about that experience.
So, you start off with 2, right? Me and my wife Trace, and then we had our first son Joe, and hopefully this is okay with folks, but that makes you a family right then and there. Yeah. And we were pretty happy about that, but we were gonna see what we could do with getting a bigger family. We were looking for maybe a playmate or 2 for our son Joe, and we wound up having a set of quadruplets. And then that's exactly what happens. It's probably the first time I can remember when I heard it and saw it, and I saw it on a screen as an ultrasound was being conducted on my wife. I was like pretty sure what I was looking at, but I still needed everybody in that room to kind of tell me what I was looking at. And I'm no doctor. Right. And so there were other things that I wasn't even thinking about that they would later pull me to the side and say, these are some things you need to think about. If that wasn't enough, when we thought we were done, we had one more. So we had 1, 4, and 1. Is that pretty much defined my life from forward, and I wouldn't have traded it for the world, by the way.
Yeah, that is amazing. With that, what was your, talk to me about the moment that you see 4 little blips on a screen, right? Like what was going on, mentally, what were you thinking? And what advice, a solicited or unsolicited, kind of came rushing into your life that enabled you to navigate that? Because let us not forget, you're in the middle of a military career at the same time, right? So I'm sure there's a lot of variables that go into that calculation.
Absolutely. So I was an operations officer in an EA-6B squadron out in Cherry Point, North Carolina. Yeah. And like I said, not a doctor. And this was in the, late 90s. And the first thing the doctor, who was a Navy lieutenant, pulled me aside and he says, the chances of this going completely right are actually really low. Yeah. And that was a very quick morale, suppressant. Good news is that it all did work out very well for us. And then I also started to think about this deployment that I had going on with my squadron. And then I realized I'm not going to be able to do that deployment. There's no way that I can leave my wife behind with, a 6-month-old so far, and then with 4 other children. And by the way, I wasn't prepared at all for what, the scope and scale of the attention that quadruplets would take. We learned an awful lot along the way. Thank God that people were patient with us. Yeah. At first we thought that can't go, and we didn't know where to go for help. I couldn't go on my deployment, and we didn't really know where to go for help to try to pull this delivery off. And so, bad on me, I thought I had to leave the Marine Corps. Yeah. And I will tell you that it was a shocker even for the Marine Corps, but the right kind of folks got involved at Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and even within my own chain of command, the CG, Commanding General of 2nd Marine Air Wing, eventually got his attention. And this could take the whole 30 minutes, but it all worked out. And I'll tell you what, the Marine Corps took such good care of me. You know, I used to tell folks, I was a major at the time. I'd give them 60 years if they'd take it from me. And if they would let me jump back into a flight suit, I'd try to give them 60 years if I could.
Yeah.
It turned out so well for us.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Tell me, who is Frank Kelley in one headline?
So when people ask me about, it starts with the military career. The first thing I say is I'm a prowler guy, and that surprises a lot of people. When I had Marine Corps Systems Command, there were people that didn't even know what my MOS is, but I'm very proud of being a prowler guy. I like to tell people I'm also a recovering unmanned systems advocate. And we can talk a little bit about that later as well. But I'm also a fleet average father and husband, just trying to keep up with an extraordinary family, the Kelleys. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. That's great. And I really enjoyed something that you said to me a couple days ago when we were preparing for this, in terms of, we got to get into a little bit more detail with your family journey, right? And you had mentioned directly that the biggest takeaway for you in that moment was learning to be humble enough to ask for help. And for our listeners out there, a lot of folks are either, starting families, they're on that journey, or they're starting businesses, which is basically like, birthing quadruplets, right? And I think it's a really, really important lesson for a founder to understand. It's one thing to say you want to ask for help, but it's another thing to actually do it. But then you took it a step further and you said, you can learn and be humble to ask for help. And then once you get it, you do not negotiate the help. You take it as it is. And I loved that. That stopped me in my tracks. I've mentioned you, I quoted you 5 times in the last 48 hours. One was to my boxing coach. The other was to a business partner. So I really appreciate that. I think it's an important lesson personally and professionally, because we tend to get very prescriptive, right? About like, well, I want help, but I want it exactly this way for it to work for me. And, sometimes you can't afford that, right? So I thought that was really interesting. Talk to me about flying, being a prowler guy. And for people who don't know what prowlers do, if maybe you could give a quick sentence on that.
Well, the tragic thing for me is if you want to look at a prowler, you're going to find one on a stick outside of places like Cherry Point, North Carolina, maybe even up at NAS Woodby Island, or even in the Pensacola Naval Aviation Museum. And I've had lots of young people who point that out to me a lot, was, hey, your airplane's in a museum. And I never thought that was going to happen. When it came time for me to get winged, I didn't even know we had EA-6Bs, and I didn't even know we conducted electronic warfare. But that's what I was told that I was going to learn how to do and what I was going to fly. And everybody told me that, you're going to fall in love with your first airplane, and it'll be your true love. And they are absolutely true. The life in the prowler community was fantastic. Some of the best leaders I've ever met in my life, certainly some of the best aviators I've ever met in my life, were all in Prowler Squadron, and I've flown in both Navy squadrons and Marine Corps squadrons. One of the interesting twists, I don't even think you and I had a chance to talk about this, was I got plucked away from my Navy experience in terms of training, and I was sent to the Air Force. Out at Mather Air Force to get my electronic warfare training. And that was another sort of like one-off thing in the strange career of Frank Kelley. And it did, in many ways, it was different than my peers in terms of their training. I mean, it was different enough that instructors at Woodby Island noticed it, and even some of the more senior guys noticed it at Cherry Point. Did a unit deployment program out at Iwakuni, Japan, went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then also had a chance to go to a place called China Lake, which not too many people know about.
I have been to China Lake.
And when I was told I was going to China Lake, a bunch of my buddies came up and said, well, Frank, you're terminal. You'll never make it past major, and you'll be divorced within 3 months. It was our favorite duty station. I became much better at my job, and the people that I was surrounded with were extraordinary. Extraordinary officers. I mean, I could throw some names at you like Decoy Dunaway and Jeff Zoyle Penfield, some icons in the Navy, and these were my peers. I mean, that was a great crowd to run around.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember the first time I landed in China Lake. We were on Mil Air, right? So you can see the landing strip as you come down. And I kid you not, one, I didn't really know where I was, right? And two, a literal tumbleweed goes across the runway, and I'm thinking, where am I, right? And then the minute that I got, outside the jetway and I'm starting to engage in the community, it was like this 2,500 person community that it felt like a family. It felt like my Italian family of like 50 people, right? Like it was just so niche. It was amazing.
Well, you got it right. You got it right for sure. That is exactly. It's the only duty station my wife ever cried when we left.
Yeah. It's interesting because people always get scared for that assignment, and then on the back end, I hear a lot of that. Admiral Moran, Mike Moran is another one.
Yeah,
of course. 1 star for being there. So talk to me a little bit about your message to Garcia moment, right? So you've mastered the quads, right? You have another child. You're going staying in the Marine Corps because the right people bet on you, and you bet on yourself, and you're all in. I know I'm skipping a lot of your career, but I think this moment that you described as your personal message to Garcia moment is fascinating. I'd love to pull that apart a little bit.
So I had a chance eventually to get to Marine Corps Systems Command after having spent a tour in Naval Air Systems Command. That was also an excellent tour for me. So now I get a chance to see both Navy and Marine Corps way to do acquisition. And while I was at Marine Corps Systems Command, I had a chance to start up a very small unmanned systems office there. But if you remember back in that time period, about 2006 timeframe, this asymmetric threat of improvised explosive devices is really, it is causing a huge problem. And, there were all sorts of different approaches to how we could counter this threat. And one of the approaches was going to be using electronic warfare assets. And it just so happened that the CG of Marine Corps Systems Command at that time, who happened to be an aviator, helicopter pilot, he knew that I was a Prowler guy and said, hey, maybe this electronic warfare guy might be able to help us. So he asked me to come down to a meeting one day between him and some of the companies that were providing support for the installation of these devices in tactical vehicles. And there was some problems with performance. And I was at this meeting and it just wasn't adding up. And I can remember the guy's name, by the way, was Major General Bill Catto, Catman. He slaps the table and he says, Frank, pack your bags. I'm going to send you to Iraq. You're going to see if you can help fix this performance issue that we have, both in terms of the vehicles actually performing their counter IED mission, but also in terms of getting our installation numbers up. So he wanted that installation thing fixed. He wanted the numbers to get raised. But then he also said, I need you to go out and talk to Brigadier General Robert Neller, who would eventually become Commandant of the Marine Corps. And and I said, yes, sir, of course, we'll do that. What would you like me to say? And he said, you'll figure that out when you get there. And so for me, that seemed like that little snippet out of the book of, message to Garcia.
Oh, yeah.
And I got to tell you, as a younger guy, when your CG tells you, you've got good instincts, that's a great feeling, but you don't want to screw it up either. And fortunately, I had two folks that were supporting me, Captain Brian Dixon, fantastic human being. As a matter of fact, we called that installation facility, we called that Dixon's Depot out in the desert. And I also had, at the time, Master Sergeant David Korf, who was probably one of the smartest Marines I ever served with. And Korf and I would go roaming around Iraq in that Fallujah, Ramadi, Taqadum area to go find, and we eventually did find General Neller, and he did meet with us. And what we were there to do was pledge our support to him and, all of his Marines. What
did you say to Neller when you arrived?
So the interesting thing was that as I remember it, which could be wrong, I can remember General Neller at the time looking at me and saying, am I here to support you? And I said, absolutely not. We are here for you. Yeah. And you could see that the light came on. He says, well, then this is what I need.
Yeah.
And he told me what he needed. And I said, okay, then that's what we are going to do.
Yeah.
And, the good news is I didn't have to pick up the phone and call back to General Catto or anything. He gave me and Corf and Dixon all that authority to speak on behalf of Syscom. And I got to tell you, we did it. We also did it with industry support, by the way. The folks that were there that were doing the installations, they were not Marines. They were civilians that came out there, to answer that call. Remarkable human beings that worked round the clock and did whatever it took.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, this point in time in, our nation's history, and specifically this military problem set, because this same time period came up. It was a little bit later, so 2012 timeframe, but with standing up of GIATO in our last interview with Trish Martinelli, who's the executive director of the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. And, I'm wondering, if you look at whether you were from the military side and you were in the field trying to solve it, or you were at headquarters trying to solve it, there was all these kind of what I'll define as mini tiger teams that were popping up to move rapidly, where egos actually didn't matter. Like, people had autonomy because it was very clear metric of success, right? Life and death. This is very easy, right? We're losing too many people, figure it out. And I think I have this theory, I don't have enough data to support it yet, but I think that this moment in time really is a good template. What then gave birth to the Strategic Capabilities Office and gave birth to these other innovation cells. At least the right framework, but we'll see. I have to do some more digging. I'm curious from your perspective, if as you got the right SMEs, right? You have your message to Garcia moment, you stand up the right SMEs, you have the authority and autonomy to execute. You've figured out the integration points, you figured out how to leverage industry and exploit them at what they're best at, right? All these things occurred. Do you think that this moment in time, if there's any lessons learned that could be replicated for the Ukraine fight today? And what I'm specifically, getting at, and I understand our conversation is a very personal perspective, right? So we're not saying anything on behalf of the department or having a stance, but from your personal experience in your military career, as you see the Ukraine fight and how our acquisition system is performing well, and lessons learned, is there anything that you take from this message to Garcia moment and suggest that we take a look at and maybe replicate in the current Ukraine fight?
So I think that there's a lot, I guess the first thing you could say is that unfortunately sometimes it takes a crisis, right, for us to get to that point. That may or may not be fair, but it's certainly a sense of urgency that is so compelling that all that other sort of stuff that gets in the way, completely disappears. I'll give you another one, by the way, that's interesting. I will get back to Ukraine, but I also happen to be in the building when MRAP was another way to respond to the IED threat as well. And I got to tell you, it was a super proud moment for me, because I saw people at the highest level of OSD and the Secretary of the Navy. I mean, it was impressive the way they reacted, the way they supported each other, the way they addressed the fundamentals of, but just had their back. I mean, literally, had each other's back, and decisions were made rapidly. I mean, I was an aide when I was there, and I was literally running notes between people at 9 o'clock at night, just to make sure, that the individuals would see it. I think that one of the things that I've actually had a chance to hear from some officials, and not extraordinarily high or anything like that, they're appreciative of all the help, that is coming, especially, from the United States, for sure. And when it comes fast, they're even more appreciative. And when it's very responsive, this kind of goes back to the point that we made about, you don't necessarily negotiate the help. They know what they want to do with it, right? Nobody needs to help them. We do need to help them probably with training. And when it comes with training, that's really important. But how they're employing it, all that, they wanted us to know we've got that figured out. We just need the stuff right now. And so I do think there is no doubt in my mind that the response of at least the United States has been obviously greatly appreciated. It doesn't even begin to describe the sense of gratitude, that they have. So.
Yeah, absolutely. As I learned more about your background, I want to kind of rotate backwards just a little bit on that. You had this unique exposure to different military services, right? So like you went into the Air Force and got not you didn't wear the Air Force uniform, but you got trained, right, in these different outfits. And it appears to me that a theme that has followed your career is your ability to set up an infrastructure. A lot of the jobs you had, you either asked for or somebody told you, hey, we need a guy kind of like you, and we don't really know what this looks like, but figure it out, right? So that to me, if you follow what happened to those initiatives after you left, the theme for you is they kept growing, right? And they might have morphed into different, a little bit different op tempos and things like that, just based on need, but they still existed. That as a business owner and founder is the hardest thing to do, is to get yourself out of the equation and have something evolve and continue on and take on its own life, right? Why do you think, like, what do you think actually programmed Frank Kelley to be able to have that ability to set something up to help others succeed with or without you there?
I had the benefit of having some phenomenal leaders. I actually can't think of a bad CEO I ever had. Now I know people are thinking, wow, shameless career move, but don't forget, I'm not having any more fitness reports written on me. I don't have to say that. But if I go back as an example, just as an example, to the two CEOs that I had at China Lake, two Navy captains, phenomenal. I saw demonstrated quite clearly how you help people, but then also how you task and just let them go. I mean, Garth Van Sickle, that was one, Captain Garth Van Sickle, Captain Scott Ronnie, both of those guys taught me that. I think the other thing is, having those kids the way we had them, and having people come into your house and just either feeding your kids when you want to feed your kids while you fold the laundry and mop floors and do that kind of thing. There's other things, but it's got to be done. I think that extra dose of humility, kind of showed me that, that situation that you described, that you got to let it go. So let me tell you, so I say I'm a recovering unmanned systems guy. And I was so proud of that work that our unmanned systems team did in those early days. And we did everything that the Secretary of the Navy asked us to do. We did not want to give it up. None of us wanted to give it up, and everybody's kind of doing their part. But I do think that the Navy has done a phenomenal job on the operational side of the house, picking things up with the unmanned task force. It's being led by Michael Stewart, also Captain Michael Brasseur, who's out there in Task Force 59. I mean, just look at your early bird every day. There's something going on out there with unmanned systems. And I think that the Navy's done a phenomenal job of picking up what we were doing in ASNRDA on that Secretariat side, and then operationalizing that. So, you got to say, hey, guess what? They needed me up to a point, but now it's somebody else's turn to kind of pick up the ball and take it to the next phase. I wish
that handoff is really interesting. Like I don't know why, but this is the visual I'm getting. I'm like imagining this production line of kids, right? Of like diapers, feeding, laundry, and that handoff that you just trust that the next person's going to do their job is really important. And it's ironic to me that who knows, you can't actually get to the correlative effect, but it's kind of ironic that I think your experience becoming a husband and a father helped you build those types of reps, right? Because it's like egos out the door, humbleness aside, whatever, because you have a life to protect, right? That's yours that you made. Yep. And I wonder how much of that actually directly or indirectly, bled into your professional career. And maybe that's the root of why you're able to build the infrastructure and then move on,
Well, I think that you just brought up a really good point. It's the visualization, that I have is in terms of, you can imagine this tiny little house, what it looked like with, all the activity that was in there. And that is also this, you said egos out the door. You're the one that mentioned egos. Okay. It's not like we have these things issued to us, but sometimes, we think we do, especially when we're in the Marine Corps. But people know what to do. You're no smarter than anybody else around you. They know what to do. And if everybody knows the mission is to get the next thing done, the laundry gets folded, the milk bottles get filled, the kids get bathed,
The UAS platform comes online.
Exactly. Yeah. Super good point. Really good point.
No, that's great. So I want to wrap up with a discussion to give you an opportunity on, what you hope to see out of next generation, defense leaders and some tactics. So we'll have a little bit of a conversation about this. You and I got to some, back and forth on this idea of what is surprised, right? Like, we can have a blanket statement of we keep getting surprised, but also how do we define that? How do you toggle between constantly being proactive enough, but not burning resources, right? And being efficient and reactive when necessary, and this balance. And that kind of, that led us to this idea of, well, let's just assume we aren't quite prepared. We aren't as quite prepared as we could be, whether that preparation is to be reactive or proactive, doesn't really matter. How do you think, when we build reps in military exercises, for example, right? It's very easy to measure building reps for combat. So, how many drills did we do? Did we do it well? Bridge that to me to your current role and what you're seeing out of the defense acquisition community. How can we build reps there in an answer of, not getting surprised?
Well, this idea of, nobody learns how to do acquisition in college, right? For the most part, so getting a foundational, knowledge is obviously really important. But where the money is actually made is as teams are working their programs. And if we could get like a simulated like environment where we have engineers performing the role of engineers, contracting officers performing the role of contracting officers, PMs doing, the program management work, and give them, some like a scenario that could be based on reality, with a couple of perturbations along the way, also based on reality, and see how teams perform in those particular situations. I think we'd get a couple of things. First of all, we immerse people in that environment, and it is incredible what you learn, pick up, and what you'll never forget when you're in that kind of environment. Ask anybody that's been on a military exercise, or even Marines that have gone through the immersive infantry trainer, like out on the West Coast. But I also think the feedback that we would get from that is, hey, this particular policy that we just developed, it's not quite working the way we thought it was going to be worked. Maybe it needs to be tweaked. And I think that there's a feedback loop in there that if we could get lots of people in these simulated environments, see how a variety of teams are perform. And oh, by the way, we've had a chance to see some of this at at DAU, I'll say right now, and it's been really, really positive. The other positive thing is the folks that are actually out there doing it want to help and support, by the way, because they think it's one way for them to get back, but it's also a way for them to see how things are working. It's a way for them to get reps and sets as leaders and thinkers and policymakers.
Yeah. Well, it's like, it's any, I'm watching, what is it called? Hard Knocks right now, because of my beloved Detroit Lions. It's about them, right? And so it's their training camp, and Coach Campbell, his whole thing is grit, and it's just like it really plays to the heart of where I'm from and all those things. Now the Lions record last year sucked. Like you look at their won 3 games out of total, right? So but it's interesting his approach to training camp. He's playing like they're going to the Super Bowl tomorrow, and his reps and sets are, fully padded, full tackle, like all they do these different things to protect head injuries and all that stuff. But it's, how can you expect to go to game 1, soon to be against the Eagles, and win if you're not preparing that way, right? And military is the same way. That's the point of exercises. So I've really become passionate about how to figure out, I'm a combat sport person, so those analogies make sense to me, but how do we take that, thought process and tools and tactics and apply to the acquisition workforce? Because look, wars and peace are won and protected in the margins. And for me, the margins are acquisition, period, full stop. Doesn't matter how big our tanks are, doesn't matter who's on the front, right? And so I've been having a lot of fun kind of living in that space, and it's been a lot of fun to talk to you. You've opened up my perspective a lot, so I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you would like to leave the audience with, a call to action, anything that's on your mind that we haven't covered?
Actually, really what I want to do is I want to thank you, and just our discussions over the last couple of days have reminded me about things that I never should have forgotten.
Yeah.
And I want you to think of what's at stake. I think of what's at stake because I have 4 second lieutenants, that are out there, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that did sort of change things for me. And so now it's not that I care more, but actually, yeah, it is. I do care more, and I want to make sure we get this right. And so the damn I give right now, if I look at your sign behind you, maybe it's got a little plus sign, for me. And the good news, I see people that give a damn all the time about this. Don't give up. It can be hard. And that's when we get to see these reps and sets that people get where they try to figure out another way. Whereas if we didn't put them in those high pressured environments, they would never, they wouldn't necessarily be thinking about, so that by the time they get into the real world, they can say to themselves, I've been here before. Here's how we're going to attack this problem.
Yep. I love it. Mr. Kelley, how do we find you? How do we follow you and engage with you and the things that you're doing in your daily life?
You mean in terms of like my social media activity, or
maybe just a LinkedIn plug is great, and we can follow you.
So I mean, it's to be honest, I think it's just Frank.Kelley. I don't even know what my LinkedIn is out there, but I am out there. So if you look up Frank Kelley on LinkedIn, it's easy to find.
And we'll follow the great things that you're leading at DAU, and look forward to following along. Thank you for your time and your perspective today. I appreciate it as always. And
all right, Joy. Thank you as well.
Thanks.